is, I think, what might be taking place here. That ties everything in from quantum physics, theology, if you will, which is really, theism is what? The focus on God, but you're presupposing a notion. So is there really any matriculation or science that can be based around that? There really isn't, because you're going off on such a presupposition as to use one term that really is the header for everything, right? And then you deviate off that because you create another term from another perspective, and then you're still stuck with the same nomenclature. What people, I believe, have to come down to when it comes to computer science, quantum physics, philosophy, mathematics, any sort of scalable measure, to not create some system out of it, but to start to quantize the attributes that actually might exist when nothing really exists at all. Nothing can be established as a material form. And even more so, the material form doesn't substantiate the substance itself, doesn't quantify or qualify it as existing, right? So we get into principles. We look at the base principles and the fact that what really may be going on here when we look at the Zizians, these chaos theory type manifestations in society. You could go back to other forms, Jonestown, maybe even David Koresh, things like this, right? Oklahoma City bombings, the Unabomber, program killers, whatever you name, is an element, a symptom of the toxicity as it's seen in that marked era or that instance in quote unquote modernity, right? But what you're really seeing is always in all movement is this elastic or this plasticity of a returning back to a non-notional aspect. The only thing that really stands solidified as a truth, like Nietzsche said, there is no real truth, there are only interpretations, right? There are no facts. When we get into these fact checking, without a gold standard, without a golden mean, life tends to get more and more chaotic. And the further away from that, really the further from home we are, or a core, a nexus, a home base. So what's really happening here is that error is being repeated and created quite intentionally, because the ontology itself, or you could even assume it as Dɪᴍᴏ, right, from Heidegger's theoretician matrix, where you're giving it a name, but you're giving it a sort of ubiquitous mercurial abstract name or quality, right? Where you're saying this is just a substance. We still can't say through the garbled up geometry exactly what lies at the center, because every time we try to pick something, it says, okay, supposing this is your truth, right? Supposing truth is a woman, right? Nietzsche's famous analytical composition based around that as a speculative process that really harkens back into Isis, Dionysian cults, Hathor, Lilith, and so forth. And you begin to look at this, and it's like when you look at all the errors or the nuance and the subset that come from a place, monad, zero at the phi or phi center or beginning of this so-called Fibonacci type inference of perfection, right? You get into this area where you go, is everything errored? And these errors are quite intentional. Like this is an error factory, planned obsolescence. And the identifiable markers that constitute and make you seem like an individual, when you break down all of those constituents, you come back to basic truths based around principles. You get past all the principalities that mark somebody through egalitarian democratic systemization and say you are an individual. You look at the individuality and it's really based on error. And then we want to get into those little quirky aspects of and then call this a self, right? We want to name this as the self. We want to say this is what identifies you as an individual, or an individualized event, how it's marked. If there's always or an ingredient panel, you have the hot and the sweet, the acid and the alkaline, and somehow out of the boredom of vanilla, right? You come up with new features, or rather the ontology comes up with new suppositions, errors on errors on errors on errors, and everything is based on this, even in the error way that we live and think, based on bloodlines, based on family crests and namesakes, an oligarch, if you will, right? But what is happening over and over again seems to be this elastic return, again, by the ontology, to uniformly go back into a principle, a pure source principle, gold standard that nothing else can be compared to, and that actually gives us all the rendering and the idea that we can somehow live forever, and that nothing really truly dies. That, like the gospel of truth, when you look at the Nag Hammadi texts, Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth, you start to see more elements of truth through these codices emerge. You don't necessarily have to run toward Gnosticism, Coptic Gnostic type texts, or more esoteric, arcane, liminal themes. But when you see the truth as it's been written, like the gospel of truth with the error jars, this is exactly what the inference is saying, right? Is that the closer you get back into our roots, the closer you get back into the root of principles, beyond principalities, where everything has sort of gone through like this Metatron's cube, and you're getting back to the center of everything, the monad, if you will, that in itself is that Fibonacci, that golden mean, that gold standard, that is the pure source or the pure center.